The Great Ice Storm of '98. Huge, high-voltage electrical towers lay like twisted toys on the snow, and the devastation ran for miles. The high winds and freezing rain hit eastern Ontario on Monday, January 5th. Over the next week, the storm spilled tons of ice on trees and forests, and on the electrical wires, poles, and pylons that kept the lights on. And as the electrical system was crushed, the lights began going out across eastern Ontario. By Tuesday, there were 30,000 families and businesses without power. By Wednesday, 50,000. And by Friday, there were more than 120,000 businesses and families in the cold and the dark. And 40% of the power grid in eastern Ontario lay in wreckage, crushed by tons of ice. And then the work began. Along with the military, with crews from municipal utilities, with volunteers, and the brave people who had lost their power in the coldest part of the winter, Ontario power workers fought back in a war against the cold and the darkness. Everyone who was there has a right to be proud of what was achieved. The power workers have made this video to help make sure we all remember. Before the storm had even ended, power workers from the worst-hit areas were out there, trying to patch lines that just fell again when more tons of ice landed on them. From January 6th to January 24th, the rebuilding effort fell into a sort of pattern. 16-hour days that started in the dark and ended in the dark. At its peak, the fight against the darkness involved over 1,000 line and forestry crews from the power workers, several hundred other skilled utility workers, both union and non-union, and hundreds of members of the Canadian Armed Forces working side by side. And while the crews in the field were fighting the ice hand to hand, other power workers were on the telephones at hydro call centers, telling people who were trapped in the dark when crews would arrive, when they could hope to have the heat and the light back on, and giving good advice to help people make it through the storm. At the peak of the disaster, the power workers at hydro call centers logged in more than 30,000 calls a day. In the darkest areas of Ontario, the marshalling yards came to life in the early hours of the morning as power workers tracked the progress made the day before and planned the next steps in rebuilding the system. The crews, along with the soldiers, gathered in the yards before dawn to get their assignments, to plan how to approach the work, to get extra warm socks if any were to be had that day, and then, still before it was light, the crews loaded up and they went out into the dark and cold. What will the people who fought the war against the darkness and the cold remember most clearly? For many, it will be the cold itself. As the hours passed each day, the wind and the cold found its way through the warmest clothing. And anyone who was there will remember how hard the work was and how tired they got. Some of the jobs, like chipping fallen wires out of the ice, could only be done by hand. And for other jobs, like putting new poles into the frozen ground, there just wasn't enough equipment or enough time to do things the usual way. So it came down to strong arms, strong backs, and determination. Most people who were there still talk about the strong sense of teamwork and shared sense of purpose that united them. Power workers, crews from other utilities, and other unions, the soldiers, all working as a team to get the power back on. When a hydro truck got stuck, the Army was called in to pull it free. When there was more work than one crew could handle, there'd be 3 or 4 or 5, as many as it took, all working together in partnership. And the crews worked together as long as it took. A few extra hours after dark could mean that hundreds or even thousands of people would not have to spend another night in the cold and dark, so they kept working. It was a huge job. In the 18 days it took the power workers and the other crews to get the lights back on, pole by pole and road by road, they used 84,000 insulators. That's 20% more than Hydro used in all 12 months of 1997. They put in more than 10,000 poles, installed 1,800 transformers, and strung about 2,800 kilometers of new wire. That's about as much wire as Hydro would normally use in 14 years, and it was done in just 18 long, cold days. As the work was completed and the power restored to people who had been in the dark and the cold, everyone who had contributed to winning the war against the darkness shared a sense of satisfaction and achievement that they'll remember forever. Ontario learned a lot from the ice storm of '98, about how hard we could work, about what determination, teamwork, and dedication can achieve, and about the pride and the commitment of the Power Workers Union, the people part of Hydro.